Agnello Queiroz, do presidente da Confederação Nacional da Indústria, Robson Andrade, do ministro de Estado da Educação, Aloysio Mercadante, do ministro de Estado da Previdência Social, Garibaldi Alves, do ministro de Estado do Desenvolvimento, Indústria e Comércio Exterior, Fernando Pimentel, do ministro do Trabalho e Emprego, Brizola Neto, do ministro de Estado interino das Comunicações, César Alvarez, do ministro da Ciência, Tecnologia e Inovação, Marco Antônio Halpe, da ministra-chefe da Secretaria dos Direitos Humanos da Presidência da República, Maria do Rosário, do vice-presidente do Conselho Nacional das Instituições de Rede Federal de Educação Profissional, Científica e Tecnológica, Sérgio Pedini, e do senador Armando Monteiro Neto. Senhoras e senhores, dando início à cerimônia de abertura do 7º Encontro Nacional da Indústria, Balanço Pronatec, ouviremos as palavras do presidente da Confederação Nacional da Indústria, Robson Andrade.
Bom dia a todos. Excelentíssima Senhora Presidenta da República Federativa do Brasil, Dilma Rousseff, muito obrigado pela presença da senhora neste nosso Encontro Nacional da Indústria. É um prazer e uma alegria para todos nós aqui recebê-la nesse momento, Presidenta. Caro Governador do Distrito Federal, Agnello Queiroz, Ministro de Estado da Educação, Aloysio Mercadante, Ministro de Estado da Previdência Social, Garibaldi Alves, Ministro de Estado de Desenvolvimento, Indústria e Comércio Exterior, Fernando Pimentel, Ministro de Estado do Trabalho e Emprego, Brizola Neto, Ministro de Estado interino das Comunicações, César Alvarez, Ministro de Estado de Ciência, Tecnologia e Inovação, Marco Antônio Halpe, Ministra-chefe da Secretaria dos Direitos Humanos da Presidência da República, Maria do Rosário, Vice-presidente do Conselho Nacional das Instituições de Rede Federal de Educação Profissional, Científica e Tecnológica, Celso Pedrini, Conselheiro Emérito da CNI, Senador Armando Monteiro Neto, Conselheiro Emérito da CNI, Albano Franco. Cumprimento a todos os presidentes de federação aqui presentes, dos 27 estados da federação, na pessoa do Antônio Silva, presidente da Federação das Indústrias do Estado do Amazonas e segundo vice-presidente da CNI. Presidente do Conselho de Administração do Grupo Gerdau, nosso líder, presidente da Câmara de Políticas de Gestão da Presidência da República, Jorge Gerdau, diretor-presidente do Sebrae Nacional, nosso parceiro, Luiz Barreto. Quero cumprimentar também o Gabriel Barbosa Machado, aluno do Instituto Federal da Bahia, em nome de quem cumprimento todos os alunos do Pronatec aqui presentes. entidades de classe, meus amigos, companheiros, presidentes das entidades de classe, das associações nacionais setoriais da indústria, empresários, imprensa, senhoras e senhores. Em nome dos representantes da indústria brasileira, agradeço a Vossa Excelência, senhora Presidenta Dilma Rousseff, por ter gentilmente acolhido o nosso convite para participar do 7º Encontro Nacional da Indústria, enriquecendo este evento com a sua honrosa presença. Vossa Excelência não tem medido esforços para manter um permanente e profícua interlocução com a indústria. Por atos, mais do que por palavras, tem reconhecido a importância da indústria na consolidação de um Brasil próspero, socialmente justo e ambientalmente equilibrado. O Encontro Nacional da Indústria, senhora Presidenta, é o mais importante evento promovido pela Confederação Nacional da Indústria. Hoje, como a grande convenção anual do setor. O nosso encontro reúne cerca de 2.000 participantes, entre presidentes de federações, de sindicatos, além de membros das mais representativas associações setoriais, autoridades e especialistas de renomadas instituições nacionais e internacionais. Neste encontro, teremos como eixo central das discussões o futuro da indústria. Seu objetivo será promover uma reflexão sobre as dificuldades, desafios e caminhos a serem seguidos pelas empresas brasileiras na conquista de níveis mais elevados de competitividade. Nos diversos painéis serão discutidos os principais temas que condicionam a competitividade do setor produtivo, como inovação, infraestrutura, educação, tributação, relações de trabalho e burocracia, entre outros. Todas essas questões estratégicas e vitais para o crescimento sustentado de nossa economia. Precisamos apressar o passo para elevar a competitividade da indústria brasileira e enfrentar um cenário em que ainda persistem os efeitos da crise global gerada nos países desenvolvidos. Acreditamos que com a superação de entraves ao pleno desenvolvimento econômico e social, podemos crescer num ritmo vigoroso, deixando para trás a memória de 2012, ano que, infelizmente, a indústria ficou estagnada. Para tanto, defendemos a adoção efetiva de medidas que diminuam os custos de produção e assegurem os necessários estímulos aos investimentos. Apoiamos com entusiasmo as corajosas iniciativas do governo nesse sentido. A ampliação da taxa de investimentos públicos e privados é condição obrigatória para viabilizar o necessário aumento da produtividade que caracteriza os ciclos de expansão prolongados observados em outros países. Esse é o nosso grande desafio. Juntos, setor produtivo.
Together, the productive sector should seek solutions that ensure greater rates of growth than we've had, which are still insufficient to undertake all of our needs. The government we acknowledge, has made efforts to reduce production costs in Brazil as a means of stimulating the competitiveness of national products and the capacity of growth of our economy. We acknowledge, Madam President, how right the government was in reducing the electricity costs and reducing interest and investing in logistic initiatives. These measures will produce positive results in 2013 and prepare us for the moment when the world recovery occurs. The energy consumption is one of the most important factors here. The industry represents 43% of its consumption. Reducing energy prices
sobre as concessões e reduz os encargos setoriais incidentes sobre a tarifa de energia elétrica é de extrema importância para todo o setor industrial brasileiro. Com essas medidas, o governo promoverá significativa redução nos custos do produto nacional e dará importante sinalização para garantir os investimentos de longo prazo no setor elétrico. A queda de juros levou a taxa Selic de 7,25% e a taxa real de juros a menos de 2%, valores que nunca alcançamos antes. Nosso querido amigo e líder José Alencar, defensor incansável da redução dos juros, por certo se sentiria realizado se aqui estivesse. Também a busca de equilíbrio entre juros e câmbio, com a correção relativa da cotação do dólar, propicia melhores condições para nossas empresas competirem no exterior e no mercado interno. Consideramos a proposta de renegociação com os governadores de uma alíquota única de ICMS interestadual, com a convalidação dos incentivos fiscais já concedidos, um passo essencial na direção da reforma.
The fiscal advantages so far done essential for reducing the discrepancies between states and reducing the fiscal war between states, which so undermines our industry. The presidency has recently announced measures to reduce the cost of civil construction through special credit advantages for small and medium-sized builders. These are advantages that we should celebrate. Madam President, there are 2 points that we should stress as being important for improving the competitiveness of our industry. The reintegration of tax paid, or the repayment of taxes to companies that are exporting products, and in consonance with the desire of the Brazilian productive sector, I would like to request officially the reduction of PSI. Created within the scope of the Brasil Maior plan, this still affects the correction of one of the negative factors of Brazil's current taxation of export products. The reduction of taxes accumulated through the production chain of exported products. Through the BNDES, the acquisition and sale of capital goods, these taxes should be reduced, and also investments in innovation and competitiveness. We request that Your Excellency give special attention to these 2 tax regimes. Madam President, we should also celebrate advantages in the field of education, thanks to the excellent prospects of the national program of access to technical education and employment, Pronatec, launched by Your Excellency in April last year at the Palace of the Planalto. Pronatec has become one of the essential actions for the evolution of vocational education in our country. ENAI has consolidated alongside SENAC, SESC, and other entities as one of the main partners of Pronatec. Today, SENAI responds for 55% of all the enrollments in the country. And in vocational education as a whole, SENAI has taken on the task of doubling the number of trained workers, and its goal is to have 0.7 million enrollments this year and to go beyond 4 million in the coming years. We have new centers for technological and technical knowledge. We have invested in 51 new mobile centers and a school ship for the Amazon region. Within the field of industrial education, we are creating a center of technology and innovation centers, 23 SENAI institutes for innovation and 61 of SENAI technology throughout the country. To achieve these goals, we will be investing 2 million results, 1/2 million in a line of credit from the BNDES to increase the basis of SENAI actions between 2012 and 2014. I should also stress here the role of mobilization of business people for innovation, known as MEI. MEI is a partnership between the CNI with the Ministries of Development, Industry and Foreign Trade, of Education and of Science, Technology and Innovation, together with BNDES, FINEP, SEBRAE and business leaders. Their goals are to incorporate innovation as a practice within Brazilian companies and to increase the effectiveness of Brazilian instruments for developing such innovation throughout Brazil. And to this end, we are establishing 27 centers for innovation in the states to build the capacity of companies to be innovators. MEI has been one of the best examples of successful cooperation between public and private sectors, and it stimulates innovation as a key to increasing the competitiveness of Brazil. As an initiative of the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation, with the indispensable collaboration of MEI and IMBRAP, was formed a company whose aim is to stimulate cooperation projects between research centers and companies for generating innovative processes and products. Unquestionably, it will bring greater effectiveness for technological development and innovation for Brazilian industry. And within this process, under Minister Mercadante, we are consolidating this project now under the guidance of Minister Rob. Ladies and gentlemen, and Madam President, we have a long path ahead of us, but we are moving forward in a firm and secure manner. We are a magnificent country with a huge economy, a consolidated democracy, strengthened institutions, high-quality jobs, and significant investments not only in infrastructure but also in education. We are a country that has examples to give in many sectors, especially based upon successful partnerships between public and private sectors. We want to help to build an even better Brazil, sharing in your vision and moving forward in all fields. We wish to associate the energy that you have devoted
trabalhando com entusiasmo que Vossa Excelência tem demonstrado, veremos nascer Brasil que exerce plenamente o seu potencial, com uma indústria forte, competitiva e inovadora, e uma gente próspera, educada, saudável e feliz. Muito obrigado.
Ouviremos agora as palavras do Ministro de Estado da Educação, Aloysio Mercadante.
Ministro do Trabalho, que é um grande parceiro do Jovanet, Ministro da Previdência Social, Garibaldi Alves. Queria saudar também a Ministra de Estado de Desenvolvimento Social.
Teresa Cambello here present, Maria do Rosário, so that you can see the importance that the President attributes to this partnership. I would like especially to greet the President of CNI, Robson Andrade, and Rafael Lucchesi, President of SENAI, because on few occasions have we had so intense a partnership in favor of science, technology and investment. And this is a promising path for industry and for Brazil, and I would like publicly to thank both and all the board of CNI. I would like to greet the 35 rectors of federal institutions here, represented by Sergio Pendini, and to greet Sergio Oliveira, the secretary responsible for Pronatec, and which is the executive secretariat of all this work. I would like to greet Barbosa Machado, who is the student of this, and Daniel Carraga of Senai, another partner of IESI, and like Senai and Senac, the Secretariat of Education, to say very briefly the following. President Dilma has made education a top priority of this government, and this construction, especially since we have a historic deficit of high-quality education in Brazil. We begin with early childhood education. We've begun with 5,700 daycare centers, Fundeb, when children are below the poverty line, because the stimulus of teaching will help with the teaching of literacy, especially for illiterate families. And we will be implementing the new Pact for Inclusion. All states of Brazil have, and all the municipalities of Brazil have joined, and we will be giving scholarships to the teachers of Brazil who are teaching Brazil's future generations to overcome one of the most serious problems of Brazilian education, the fact that 15% of our children do not learn to read and write and interpret a text up until their 8th year of age. In some regions, such as the North, 28% do not achieve these skills, and 23% in the Southeast. We will only reduce these social and regional differences if we make it a right for all children to learn to read and write and interpret a text and to do their sums by the age of 8. This is a fundamental right and a duty of the Brazilian state. It has to be our historic priority. I would also like to say that the President has defined as one of the main policies for education to advance towards full-time educations. Many of our schools today in primary education, 98% of the students are in the schools but are unable to manage a full day of school. But we are increasing this to 7 days, paying monitors, reinforcing Portuguese, mathematics and science, and our goal of 37,000 schools has now been doubled to 60,000 by 2014, with schools with full-time service. We have increased by 150% the number of enrollments in higher education over the recent decade. The federal universities that had around 30,000 enrollments, we've now come to 1,100,000 this year. Not only the public sector, but in the private sector also. 63% of increase in the supply of university places being in the private sector, and this has been done through public policies such as Priones, 1,100,000, and Theus, where we have a great number of enrollments financed by CNI. 95,000 are university engineering students, and we are reinforcing engineering and other technical skills among higher education. And among the priorities of President Dilma are 101,000 educational scholarships in Science Without Borders. We already have a large number of students studying abroad, and by 14th of January this year we'll have 20,000, because 25% of these scholarships come from the business people of this world who are our partners in placing Brazilian students in some of the best universities in the world. But we are here to celebrate another achievement. I would call your attention to ENAI. 4,160,000 participants. It's the second largest examination on the planet. What does ENAI show? When we see a woman leave a child of 5 years out of school because she is desperately attempting to do the examination, but she had this desire to move forward. Another program where we have 306 million students with early pregnancy in Brazil, and we have work of prevention of teenage pregnancy in the schools and education. But a girl of 17 years old who suffers the pain of birth, and when I call to her and say she could be doing the exam again, she cries because she speaks of the importance of this to her life. So what is this demand? It's the demand for more education, for high quality education. It is a social tsunami that is emerging, demanding high-quality education and more education in Brazil. And we must interpret this as a very significant advance for the history of Brazil. And if on the one hand we are expanding with university education, on the other we have to respond to the demand for vocational and technical education that will increase the efficiency and innovation of the productive sector in Brazil. Today we are celebrating 2,521,000 enrollments in technical and vocational education under Pronatec. In little over a year, more than 2.5 million enrollments, and this was only possible through this extraordinary partnership that we have today with ENAI especially, and the S system. We are present in practically all the municipalities of Brazil. And we will advance further in this direction. Firstly, today we are inaugurating 36 new federal institutes, and all of the mayors, I would like to ask for a round of applause because they have donated the land for the building of these federal institutes. Today we thus have 430 campuses, and we want to get to the end of our government with 483 campuses of the federal institutes. Secondly, we're increasing our partnership with 4 ministries. The Ministry of Industry and Trade, which becomes an important partner in Pronatec for the Brazil Maior plan to stimulate demand in strategic sectors that are being encouraged. We are reducing the tax burden in order to increase competitiveness and productivity. Within the Ministry of Communications, we are increasing the supply of broadband because Brazil is the third largest is advancing as the third largest consumer of computers in the world, and we are moving towards the digital world. The Ministry of Justice, because of the vast number of prisoners, are either illiterate or semi-illiterate, and we need to have a policy to provide professional education that opens some opportunity in this respect. And the Ministry of Social Welfare, where we are extending Pronatec today in order to ensure the process of rehabilitation of those who are in hospitals or recovering from industrial accidents and this type of thing. I would like to finish by saying that the other novelty that we will be signing today with the President opens a new chapter of Pronatec, which is Pronatec New Opportunities. Aside from high school students who do their technical education together with their normal education, as of now, those who have concluded secondary school and who want to go back to have technical and professional education, the doors of ENAI and the national institutes and our partners, who are so important in this, will be open to them. Aside from this, those who have not concluded high school will be able to go back to conclude secondary education together with their professional and vocational education, because in this country we need to study more. We have to study on the shop floor in order to move forward and stimulate family life and development of Brazil. Lastly, Ms. President, I would like to say that you took a historic initiative and that will leave a great heritage for Brazil, and that this debate needs to be followed because it's a central debate today. You decided through an executive order to respect contracts and to reduce the role of the courts in all this, but you established that all royalties of the new concessions, that is 100% of the oil, will generate wealth for Brazil, and 60% of the social fund, because we can't simply use this in a very immediate manner without creating a long-term saving so as not to appreciate our health or to suffer the Dutch disease. We have only to look at the large importers and exporters. Very few have industrialized. Brazil is the 6th economy in the world. We have significant industry, but we have to make oil stimulate industry and not lead to a situation where we live only by this. That's why we must invest. Half of this investment goes to education, and all new concession funding has to go to this. Why? Because oil is a non-renewable resource that future generations will not have. So, oil cannot be used simply to increase the government machinery. We have to move forward, and we will only be a developed country when we have high quality universal education. Thus I would like to thank you all, and I'm sure that you will change the 100% of the royalties must be spent on public schools. Thank you very much. Now, the President of the Republic and the Minister of Education will be giving the certificate in industrial automation to the student of the Industrial Institute of Bahia, Mr. Machado. And a plaque for the University of Nacional to the rector, representing the 35 campuses for science and technology education that have likewise been inaugurated. I would like to request a round of applause for the 35 deans who are opening new campuses for the provision of vocational and professional education. The Minister of State for Education, Minister of Education, signs the order on the FIES as a modality for financing education and takes other measures. At this moment, the President of the Republic signs the message that she sends to the National Congress with the executive order that alters Law 12,511 of 2011, increasing the scope of the education scholarship and thus strengthening secondary level technical education, and the decree that regulates Article 17 of Law 2513 establishing the composition, competence and working of the Deliberative Council of Education and Qualification, and deals with the funds for qualification and education of scientific and technological education. With the floor, the President of the Republic.
Bom dia.
Good morning, everyone. Greetings to the Governor of the Federal District, Mr. Agnello Queiroz. Greetings likewise to the President of ENAI, the Brazilian Industry Confederation, Mr. Robson Braga. And through him, I would like to further extend my greetings to all members of the industry attending this session. Greetings also to the Minister of Education, Eduardo Mercadante, Brizola Neto, Minister of Labor, Fernando Pimentel, Minister of Development, Industry and Foreign Trade, Minister of Social Security, Garibaldi Aldi, Minister Celso Alvarez, Acting Minister of Communications, Maria de Rosario, with the Secretariat for Human Rights, among other high-ranking government officials. I would also like to extend my greetings to Senator Antonio Moreira Neto, former President of CNI. Greetings as well to all mayors of those cities where we have the 35 different campuses of the Federal Professional and Vocational Education Network. My greetings as well to Mr. Sergio Pettini, Deputy President of the National Council of Federal Professional Education Institutions, as well as Technological and Scientific Institution or Educational Institutions, CONIC. Through him, I would like to further extend my greetings to all university presidents attending this session. Greetings also to student Gabriel, who has just been awarded the prize. Gabriel Machado, you have just gotten your diploma indicating you have completed a technical course on automation, or on industrial automation to be more precise. I would also like to greet all students attending this Pronatech ceremony. National Program for Technical Training and Education. Greetings to all members of the business community and attendees of the 7th National Industry Meeting 2012. Greetings also to members of the media, journalists, cameramen, women, other professionals. It gives me great honor to take part in the opening of this 7th National Meeting of Brazilian Industry. I think this is truly an event that allows us all of us attending this session, an opportunity to discuss the future of the industry in Brazil at a very relevant point in time in the Brazilian economy. Every time you take part in a session or ceremony in November or December, only with difficulty can one possibly resist the temptation of taking stock in hindsight of the past year, especially because many of the measures that were taken by us in 2012 have not yet fully yielded their results thus far. And we are quite certain that they will, of course, spread out through the economic system and will ultimately point towards a new stage in our development path. It is true that in the course of 2012, our performance, i.e. in the Brazilian industrial sector, has been somewhat rudimentary or precarious. It is also true that that industrial activity has recovered, but considering our objectives, industrial growth necessarily in the next months and years will have to prove much stronger, much more robust, especially considering that Brazil needs to have a high investment rate, and that will only be the case, effectively speaking, if in our industrial sector we have a very substantial share of investments, a much higher share of investments. In my almost 2 years in office, in my capacity as president, I have made the quest for greater economic competitiveness an objective to be pursued. Every government, every stage in every administration has a different challenge. My challenge during my administration is about seeking out greater competitiveness, both within the system as well as in the several different sectors of the Brazilian economy, and above all, without a shadow of a doubt, greater industrial competitiveness. I have also made the defense and advocacy of a stronger and more competitive industry a central component on our agenda, not out of sheer rhetoric, but rather because I am positive and certain that Brazil needs a strong industry, one which will be coupled with an expanding agricultural sector, a high-tech, technologically advanced agricultural sector, as well as, of course, a substantial outflow of commodity exports, as well as, of course, an ability to be a major services hub. Now, I believe that a strong industry is the strategic node required for Brazil to actually experience sustainable and sustained development. And that is why we have sought to change the underlying basis that govern the competitiveness of Brazilian economy. Not because we may wish to ultimately intervene in systems-related issues, but rather because if these issues are not ultimately overcome and properly solved, we will never actually experience sustainable growth in Brazil. We know this is a country that is very much rich and endowed with many natural resources, and that, of course, those riches and resources opened up a number of opportunities for further development in different sectors of the Brazilian economy. We know all too well that the wealth this country is endowed with places us in a very unique position as regards the production of commodities. A very special position indeed, but we know quite clearly that this wealth is a blessing, not a curse, and we should therefore use it not purely or simply to export primary products or commodities. We don't want to commoditize our economy. Rather, we should use our wealth and riches to, above all, diversify our production base and further strengthen Brazilian industry, may I stress, and also to invest in human capital and therefore build competitive advantages in all sectors. That is the path we believe should be followed. Above all, and especially considering the current restrictive economic scenario, and it should be so even if it were not the case. In the course of 2012, we have put in place a number of important measures. May I call to mind that the range in our, or in the threshold of our basic interest rates is included among the key measures taken in 2012. The basic reference interest rate will come to the end of the year at 7.25, an unprecedented threshold or level in the recent history of Brazil. Our real interest rate, without, of course, the inflation or deducted for inflation, is moving towards levels that are very much in line with those of the international market, which during the current crisis have now dropped to 1.5 or even negative interest rates, which of course means that the cost of securing capital has become cheaper, and therefore unmistakably leads to the competitiveness or greater competitiveness of countries experiencing crisis. And we have only reached that threshold in the past few months. We are therefore going through a transition period where investments in the real sector of the economy are likely to prove more attractive than other investment opportunities. Also, it is a period where different credit instruments are likely to come to the fore as alternative ways to allow for a more substantial degree of involvement of the private financial sector in the overall funding or financing for industrial activity or production-oriented activity in Brazil. The ongoing transition, as I described it, does take a while beyond the current period in time, and the effects of this convergence will be felt in full or in their entirety in the next few months. The central bank has therefore been able to cautiously and responsibly reduce the macroeconomic variables in a sustainable fashion, especially regarding that key and strategic component, the interest rate. Furthermore, the government has taken measures to introduce the requirements that would make that possible and bring it to fruition. especially or in particular, we have changed the rule governing the correction of the savings accounts, therefore doing away with one of the key restrictions to lower interest rates, a barrier which many people believed would not ever be overcome, especially considering the fact that Brazil is a country that experienced some trauma regarding savings accounts kidnappings or hijacking experience of the past. We have therefore designed a very creative, out-of-the-box and stable measure, which I believe has led to significant gains to savers as well. We have also, of course, adhered to our commitment to fiscal austerity, which is expressed, for example, through the net public debt to GDP ratio, an indicator which is currently at 35%, one of the world's lowest net debt to GDP ratios. The new threshold of domestic interest rates, coupled with less appreciation or a lower appreciation of the Brazilian currency. As you know, the Brazilian real was highly appreciated given the interest rates in place in Brazil. So those two variables provide us with a mix of foreign exchange and interest rates, which has proved much more conducive to production-oriented development, even if in the short term that may lead to new adaptation requirements. And that more favorable mix of variables has allowed us to take substantial steps regarding competitiveness, especially by reducing the cost of securing capital in Brazil. In other words, reducing or lowering the cost of making investments in the end of the day. Together with that very important issue, especially if one considers that one of the tools or mechanisms put in place by developed countries in order to overcome the crisis has precisely been the reduction in the costs of securing capital. So that, coupled with a sweeping and, of course, overwhelming quantity of manufactured goods that find no destination market abroad, which, of course, makes the current international scenario a very complex one, because in addition to a recession scenario, we find ourselves before a huge number of products seeking out destination markets, and therefore you see a very aggressive form of competitiveness, or a very aggressive form of competition, to be more precise, in the international scenario. Of course, I will not say something that I always say about monetary policies or the financial tsunami or quantitative easing policies, because we are also aware of that, and there is no probability that we would not take a joint stance on this issue. Of course, we are most prone to share the same stance. But we have also recently announced the removal of infrastructure bottlenecks, which of course remains the source of anxiety for not only producers but also for all of society. In August we announced an investment program targeting railways and highways, which we will implement now in partnership, hand in hand with the private sector community, and which is likely to mobilize 133 billion Brazilian reals to further expand the Brazilian highway and railway network, therefore boosting its efficiency and of course reducing the transportation logistics costs. Tomorrow we will be announcing to society a series of different actions, measures, investments, and new regulatory rules aimed at increasing efficiency and reducing costs incurred in the Brazilian ports industry, a key link in the Brazilian logistics chain. The new rules, in turn, are ultimately about boosting cargo mobility or boosting cargo flow, lower costs, and greater efficiency in the Brazilian ports system. Before the end of the year, by late December, we should be in a position to further launch an investment plan targeting regional airports, a milestone measure to ensure regional aviation will be brought to fruition in Brazil, as well as new airport concessions targeting the so-called central airport hubs. It is our objective to, by March or November, or between March and November 2013, to resume auctions of oil and gas blocks, not only in the pre but also in the post-salt layer oil deposits. That in turn will ensure greater production, not only in the medium and long-term horizon, but also will provide for new investments opportunities. The government, and I'm quite sure the Brazilian industry at large, are all too aware of the fact that the path ahead should be marked by a strong partnership, marked by an ongoing permanent channel of dialogue. That is what will allow us to put in place the optimum conditions to speed up growth and boost proper usage of installed capacity, and also expand or boost confidence and therefore increase private sector investments in Brazil. I'm talking about a strong partnership between the public and the private sector. We must be keenly and perfectly aware of the fact that is a strategic partnership for Brazil. It is strategic not only domestically, but it's also strategic from an international perspective. Because only with the private sector and the public sector working together towards the same direction and hand in hand, while assuring domestic competitiveness and international competitiveness for Brazil, only thus and then will Brazil be able to grow sustainably. All of you know that we have made great efforts to reduce the tax burden. We have not made a choice, or we have not chosen to engage in a structural tax reform, given the high degree of difficulty shown in the past few years. And despite the many attempts, the tax reform was never actually carried out. Attempts were not successful. We therefore tried to move about this issue by focusing on the most important points. We know that we have not been able to make all of the required changes regarding the Brazilian tax structure, a tax structure that can still benefit from more measures in progress. But still, I think we have made progress in relieving the tax burden on production activities, particularly the payroll tax relief measures, which we are currently fostering by changing the contribution base into the service tax INS from the payroll to the turnover, the overall billing figures, which will become the new contribution base into the service tax INSS. If I may, I'd like to stress the importance of that political decision, which is also, of course, one that has implications for greater competitiveness and very much reflects our commitment towards the Brazilian people at large. We're currently reducing the costs, or we're currently reducing labor costs with the purpose of lowering labor costs in Brazil, of course, and do so while upholding labor rights. No labor rights are to be lost, which of course in the current national and international scenario is a distinctive feature about Brazil. We will be carrying out one of the most important measures or actions aimed at reducing labor costs in Brazil. I'm talking about the reduction in energy rates, which will be key for reducing production costs. Our objective was to achieve an average reduction of about 20.2% in energy rates. To that end, we put in place two different measures, or rather two different series of measures, to be more precise. One was about, of course, reducing the dues, or the dues payable on energy rates, particularly the so-called RGR, the General Reversion Reserve, as well as the fossil fuel accounts, also known as CCC in Brazil, and the energy development account. Those three rates together, with the end of electricity contract concessions, some of which were actually brought to completion in advance, has allowed us to further reduce the rates by a substantial percentage. May I again stress my commitment to, in the early days of 2013, to make great efforts on the part of the federal government to further reduce energy rates in Brazil. The energy prices in Brazil is something that was absolutely key in Brazil. Everyone should be aware of the fact that it is just as important as reducing the interest rates and the foreign exchange rates, so as to ultimately improve investment conditions, contracts, security, stability. All of that is key to boost the overall investments environment in Brazil. Reducing the energy costs or the energy prices in Brazil is a decision that the federal government will not give up, although we deeply regret the huge lack of understanding on the part of those who do not seem to realize the importance of low energy rates today in order to ensure that our country will be able to grow sustainably in the future. The federal government will have to shoulder a pretty significant burden in introducing these measures. And we are asked the question, where do the government budget funds will be allocated? I must say that, part of those funds will be allocated to meeting the needs of the Brazilian industry and the Brazilian population, so as to cover the gaps that were never ever covered by those who came before us. We support lower energy costs in Brazil, and we will make sure it happens, because that is an important measure for this country. I could not possibly fail to also talk about the Bigger Brazil plan, the results of which can already be seen in Brazilian industry. In the case of the Bigger Brazil plan, we have brought together and combined sector-specific and systems-wide measures. We have also relieved the tax burden on investment goods, particularly the tax on industrial products and the PIS/COFINS taxes. We have also reduced the IPI tax rates for certain sectors, and we have also sped up the depreciation pattern for capital goods, trucks and wagons. Through the PSI, we have already contracted 190 billion in funding operations at extremely low interest rates. Later today, this afternoon, Minister of Finance Guido Mantega will announce the PSI program, which will apply throughout 2013. And we will therefore be in a position to ensure that the current PSI system through the Brazilian National Development Bank, BNDES, will prove a very effective system. We will also expand the current funds to more than 80 billion Brazilian reals. At the same time, we're trying to establish the so-called direct PSI program, hand in hand with the private financial sector. And that is something that the minister will announce later this afternoon for the upcoming 2013 time horizon. May I also use the opportunity to share with the audience, or members of the audience, an instruction I have recently given to my staff. We are keenly aware of the fact that we must reduce red tape or cut down on red tape, as well as the time frames required for project or development project approval, and especially as regards financing or funding. I know that the costs of financing or financial costs today in Brazil are more in line with production-oriented investments. But I am also aware of the fact that we must further shorten the time frames and therefore make the funding process swifter. I will be a strong partner with the industry in demanding that time frames are shortened, especially with the infrastructure sector as well. And I can assure you that one of my daily battle horses or tugs of war in the government on a day-to-day basis is precisely that of shortening these time frames. Also, as part of the Bigger Brazil plan, may I highlight a few essential measures regarding our key production-oriented industrial chains. Number one, we are using what is current practice in every state and in every developed country. I'm talking about the use of the government's procurement power to encourage and incentivize industrial activity. We have established preferential margins that currently apply to a number of production segments in which nationally manufactured goods are granted special conditions and treatment in bidding processes or tenders, government tenders. That is a policy that has been put in place in a number of different countries by the United States of America, or by the French, to name a few, in addition to other similar and related measures. And we are, of course, applying the same measures in Brazil in order to, therefore, be in a position to provide a level playing field for the Brazilian industry. We have also put in place a number of preferential tax regime. The most well-known is the so-called Innovar Auto. Our purpose with that new tax regime is clear. It's about expanding production and encouraging investments in technology and innovation within Brazil. Brazil is not just an export platform country, neither are we just an import platform country. Our initiatives are already yielding results, and we want to strike a suitable mix of domestically developed goods, including obviously enough an optimum mix of local content and imported goods. The initiatives put in place thus far have already yielded results, and new investments have already been scheduled for the next few years. I mean, that whole fiction about those who criticize the Innovar Auto and alleged it would not possibly be successful have not proved realistic. Much on the contrary, I would like to actually congratulate those companies that waged a bet in Brazil and came here, set up business years ago in Brazil, as well as those who have set up business in Brazil in the recent past, and which are currently putting in place substantial portions of their production and their research and innovation efforts. We are keenly interested in ensuring that all measures under the Bigger Brazil plan will truly have an effect on economic activity. Now, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, may I make a few comments on investment in education. It is my belief that education is the legacy and the type of heritage that this country should ensure be available to all of its children. It is the kind of heritage that all of us, of course, carries in and within ourselves, wherever we may go. And that is also why it is my belief that it is of utmost importance that we engage in two things in parallel tracks at the same time. Number one, investing in the most highly advanced areas of education, but at the same time, of course, not neglect basic elementary education. From early childhood education in daily care centers for children all the way up to university education. We have recently expanded the family stipend, Bolsa Familia program. If the family stipend program in Brazil were not there, we would have 36 million Brazilian men and women out there living below the level of extreme poverty and earning less than 70 reals on a per capita basis. Now, since the family stipend program was put in place in the past few years, we were able to uplift 18 million, roughly speaking, about 18 to 19, almost 19 million inhabitants have been successfully uplifted from extreme poverty levels by 2010. The remainder of those living below the poverty line, of course, posed a huge challenge for Brazil, in that this country cannot possibly afford to live with that many people living below the poverty line. And it was a key challenge, of course, and above all, it was a major distortion, because if you examine the age distribution of these people, you would conclude that mostly we were talking about young people and children, more than 50% of them in a age group distribution chart. And that, of course, posed a huge challenge on our agenda. And that is why we went ahead and added a new component to the existing family stipend program by putting in place two more, components, the so-called Affectionate Brazil Carinhoso program, the last stage of which is likely to be completed on December the 10th. So through the family stipend program card, or benefits card, we are ensuring that every Brazilian household, every Brazilian family earning less than 70 reals, about $35 per month on a per capita basis, will have at least 70 Brazilian reals available to it by way of benefits if and when one member of the family, at least one member of the family, is less than 15 years of age. So out of the 36 million Brazilians out there, we will leave only 2.5 million Brazilians to be covered as part of our promise cycle in the Extreme Poverty-Free Brazil program. The aim of the program is, of course, to uplift the millions and millions of Brazilians out there from extreme poverty. That is, of course, an ethical and a moral imperative. It is also an economic and political imperative as well. It is an economic issue in that. And because one of the key and competitive features of this country is the fact that we are a country made up by almost 200 million people. It therefore follows that this is a country of 200 million consumers as a result. A country with 200 million consumers, ladies and gentlemen, should ensure proper care of its greatest heritage, which is each and every one of its members of its population. We want to ensure these people become fully fledged citizens, consumers, and workers. And that is why, together with the Family Stipend Program and the Affectionate Brazil Program, we believe that our strategy targeting young people and youth, the key component here is, of course, education. And the education component in the program is about providing early childhood education and proper care centers for children, because that means a proper future for the country, as well as comprehensive education, which Minister of Education Mercadante calls more education. In run-of-the-mill Portuguese, it means education covering both the morning and the afternoon shifts every day.
No contrato.
Comprehensive education does not mean just sports, arts, or extramural subject matters. It means that you should be teaching Portuguese and mathematics as well on a complementary basis. So, in order to ensure that we have mathematics, Portuguese, sciences, and languages available as part of the non-standard time shift, we need more funds. And that is why we have allocated the revenues from the new oil concessions and the pre-salt layer oil deposits to the education sector. But some people may say, hey, you're not allocating any funds, to science, technology, or innovation. But I must say that yes, we are. There can be no science, no education, and no innovation whatsoever in the absence of high-quality education. That's just part of the equation. No country out there in the world, you can sweep and scan the world, and you will find that no country has actually become competitive and developed without having firmly anchored its efforts on education. We, of course, support not only high quality education in the basic segments of the education sector, but also in higher education. That is why I'm so proud of having the university presidents attending this session, because they actually show just how important, of course, higher education is for the ultimate quality of the education we want. And that brings me to what we're here to celebrate with the Brazilian National Industry Confederation, ENAI. One of the things I'm most proud of in the government is the Pronatec partnership we have engaged in recently. I think we have shown a very high degree of national maturity in proving that we have successfully built a high-quality partnership between the government and the private sector, the industry sector. I believe that Pronatec holds one of the key for the future of this country, especially as regards the efforts to add greater quality to secondary education, and number two, efforts to increase the professional quality of our workers and other players. I'm not going to be talking about the 8 million we want or the percentages we have already achieved. But what I am going to say is that every number in the overall figures reflect a young person, a student like Gabriel, a young person whose future will be differentiated in that he or she will benefit from different opportunities. He will have opportunities to benefit from, and he will provide the country with new opportunities as well. And I think we are perhaps not in a position to properly measure the size, the magnitude, and the relevance of investments in education, whether professional, vocational, or higher education universities. The Science Without Borders program is aimed at providing us with, or endowing us with, a critical mass of professionals by placing our students from all levels in the educational sector abroad, so as to allow them to benefit from opportunities to benefit from the highest educational opportunities worldwide. So that is why I'd like to thank CNI President Robson and everyone else, including every businessmen and women who have joined hands in this effort, for the huge contribution you are making to the future of this country. Something that is truly priceless. I mean, nothing or no real that is being spent in education is actually being spent. It's actually being invested. Because every real you invest in education is being invested in today. And also represents a key investment for the future. So it ensures not only the present but also the future. May I also thank the S system and also thank all of the different workers and civil servants. May I also say that I am hugely proud of this partnership. Under my administration, as I take stock and look back in hindsight in the past 2 years, one of the highlights in my administration has been the fact that we have been able to, number one, design, because we have designed things first of all, and number two, we were able to gradually overcome barriers, and then of course put things in place and implement the program. And I'm sure we will reap the fruits of our efforts. I have no doubt whatsoever. I was telling CNI President Robson a few minutes ago that I'm quite sure that what we are doing, I mean the current efforts we are currently engaged in to make professional, vocational, educational opportunities available in the hinterlands of Brazil will ultimately lead to one of the greatest revolutions in this country, the knowledge revolution, and that of access to opportunities. That, I think, will be an about face. It will be an important development not only for our companies and the industry at large, but it will also prove important for the entrepreneurial spirit of this country. Brazil is a country that can have small and medium companies. We are also a country that has a natural call and vocation for creativity. So if you add creativity plus science, if you add creativity plus technology and innovation, we will quite certainly have a country that will be endowed with a huge competitive capability. I say this because, in fact, the key differential that is there between countries and nations lies ultimately in the quality of their population, the quality of their people. And I am very, very confident in the quality of Brazilians, both men and women. Thank you very much.
This ceremony is now closed. We request that you all remain in your seats until the President of the Republic has left the venue, immediately after which we will start our first panel of the 7th meeting, the 7th National Meeting of Industry. Doing both of you. Turn it off and you...
So you were interpreting this, hearing your voice here. I have to. So when I'm on
That's right.
Realização CNI, Confederação Nacional da Indústria.
Mesmo assim, desculpa, mas...
Não, ele já tem uma transição, ela falou, a gente vai fazer uma transição, a gente tem uma agenda de transição, porque vai entregar tudo que está na mesa para a próxima. A gente vai ter uma agenda de 2, 3 meses.
Especialmente se você está entrando na vice-presidência, realmente te coloca de saia justa para fazer uma coisa. Eles têm...
Não, mas não somos nós que fazemos, é a comissão de ética.
Eu sei da comissão de ética e o advogado.
Isso.
Mas isso devia estar...
A diretoria só vai chegar à comissão de ética, o Carlos.
Mas não fizeram isso ainda?
Não, fizeram. Aí o que aconteceu? Eu perguntei, tanto que a nova presidenta, se eleita, já está sabendo.
Obrigado, Ana.
Na velocidade dos dedos no teclado voa o pensamento humano, compartilhando ideias e sonhos, estimulando o conhecimento, construindo a realidade.
Olá, muito boa tarde, senhoras e senhores. Gostaria de pedir a todos vocês que tomem seus assentos. Vamos dar prosseguimento à nossa cerimônia. Sejam todos bem-vindos ao Encontro Nacional da Indústria 2012, uma realização da Confederação Nacional da Indústria, CNI. O ENAI é um evento promovido anualmente pela CNI e esta é a sua 7ª edição. O objetivo deste encontro é trazer para a pauta de discussão grandes temas de interesses da indústria e também propor ações que venham favorecer um ambiente de negócio e a competitividade nacional, com a participação ativa da base representativa do setor produtivo. O evento conta com representantes das 27 federações estaduais da indústria e de seus sindicatos, das associações setoriais da indústria, de empresas industriais, além de entidades governamentais, acadêmicas, entre outras interessadas nos rumos e no desenvolvimento da indústria brasileira. Na edição 2012, esta edição tem como tema central o futuro da indústria. As sessões temáticas propostas para o evento vão proporcionar aos participantes conhecer os impactos revolucionários das novas tecnologias na produção industrial em nível global e trazer para a discussão, com a base de representação da indústria brasileira, aqui presente. Nós temos uma seleção de temas com o objetivo de pensar uma indústria cada vez mais forte e competitiva para o nosso país. Este evento conta com o patrocínio das seguintes organizações: Serasa Experian, INPI, ABDI, Braskem, BNDES, Andrade Gutierrez, Sebrae, SESI e Senai. Neste momento, eu gostaria de convidar o jornalista William Vac. William Vac vai moderar o primeiro painel intitulado O Estado da Competitividade Brasileira.
Só que tá aqui é que eu tenho o privilégio de dar beijinho. Vocês também querem?
Gostaríamos também de convidar ao palco para tomar os seus assentos os debatedores deste painel. O presidente da Confederação Nacional
of the National Conference, Robson Braga de Andrade. Applause, please.
Gostaria de convidar também o ministro.
I'd like to call also the Minister of Education, Aloysio Mercadante.
Convidamos também o presidente.
We also call upon the President of Sebrae, Luis Barreto. The President of the Council of Administration of the Gerdau Group, Jorge Gerdau Johann Peter. The Director of the Department for Global Strategy of Vale, Stephen Potter. And economist, Eduardo Genete da Fonseca. Prior to starting our panel with the President of the CNI and the President of SNI, we would like to share with you the results of an important project developed in partnership between two institutions. The portal of the General Law of Small and Medium Companies. This portal makes it possible to monitor, evaluate, and assist the implementation of the General Law of Micro and Small Companies at the federal, state, and municipal levels. The law of the small and medium companies is a great achievement of the Brazilian business sector, which is contributing toward a competitive business environment. Since its approval in 2006, the work has never ceased. To ensure and foment this process, we have presented the portal, which is an easy way of accompanying all the aspects of the general law and its effects on small and micro companies and its effects at the federal level, states and municipalities on the small business sector. The Observatory of the General Law is available at www.lesgeneral.com.br, and under events there are two topics on one within the CNI and one within the stand of CNI. So let us begin our panel on the state of Brazilian competitiveness. This should last 1.5 hours, and journalist William Wack will explain the dynamics of this debate.
Prioridades, avanços, desafios, entraves, inovação.
Quais as prioridades para o aumento da competitividade do Brasil? Como avançar na agenda?
What are the priorities for the competitiveness of Brazil? What is evolving? Panel, the state of competitiveness of Brazil. I hope you've all taken your seats. The President is no longer here. Those who had the opportunity to hear the President have done so, so we have work that must be carried out in a field that is vital and urgent from the standpoint of the Brazilian economy, to discuss the question of competitiveness. What are the rules? Aloysio knows very well that I hate rules. Politician and journalist, we like things to be as open as possible, unlike what happens during the presidential election period. But it depends upon you. What is of interest in this format that was selected for this debate is that you will choose the questions considered relevant. They are divided into 3 blocks. The 3 blocks of questions. Each of these blocks have 3 questions, and I understand that each of you have a magic machine whereby you can vote for a question in that block that you consider the most relevant. In other words, it is the audience that will organize the debate. We will begin in a more generic manner on this debate of the state of Brazilian competitiveness, and as we move forward I will be placing these blocks of questions up, and you will decide which of these questions you want to hear answered. So this is very simple. I will raise the questions as the conversation moves forward. I will begin with Jorge. Where is the animal spirit, the beastly spirit of business? Will everybody but leave here dying to invest, or will the current situation of low investment and what we sometimes say as journalists, not always authors, people are afraid? Where is the beastly spirit? I think that the beastly spirit is more present than ever. That the beast has learnt to be careful at certain moments. So the animal is afraid, not afraid, although he's not afraid. If you're scared, you're not a businessman. I don't know scaredy cat business people. Those who are scared stay at home. They don't take business risks. So, what I would like to say about this theme is as follows. In view of the international scenario, in view of this situation where we are in the Brazilian economy experiencing the impacts of the international dimension, and we regret that our growth rate is low, but we have to look and see what's happening in the world as a whole and what our situation is in all this. And I believe the following. I'm going to use my personal example, which is sometimes repeated depending upon the sector. Historically, we of our group always worked much beyond, with 50 or 40% more than this. Brazilian steel making was 100% more capacity than domestic demand. But when you look at this, because all excess could be exported, there was an external market and there was an exchange situation that covered the deficiencies and Brazilian uncompetitiveness. What matters in any balance sheet of any company is not to have dead capital. Nobody can pay interest on capital that's not producing. So a businessman must be very careful in his positioning, saying that the domestic market is moving forward in this market, the external market, and there's a aggravating factor. We had an entrance with very little import. Today we have to look at the domestic market with imports, and this affects practically all areas. So the beast businessman moves as the market does. We are beasts of the market. So what is the solution for this process? The measures are moving forward, but they're no longer palliative measures that are going to resolve the question. They are structural measures that are going to appear later. But the business beast is as present as ever. A little more cautiously, Eduardo, when you observe the beastly spirit, as we are beasts of the market, and the market says we must be very cautious, or is there a lack of boldness here? I believe with Georges' statement, I think there are three elements in an attempt to organize this in a different manner. There are three elements that have come together for this portrait that Brazil has lived in 2011-2012. We had overheating of the economy in 2010. This led the government very rightly to adopt macro-prudential and restrictive measures in order to rein in the speed of economic growth, and many business people, especially in the construction area, went falsely and expanded too much the supply and capacity, and this was a mistake. And then we had a worsening of the international crisis in 2011 with an impact on the financial aspects in Brazil, and that had a very worrying effect on investment, and the business people stepped on the brake or are delaying their investment plans. And lastly, there's a question of trust, which I believe relates to the indefinition of the current government. The government adopted activism for incentives and stimulus, for protecting through tariffs, through macroeconomic regime, which leaves the business sector to be more cautious rather than to commit itself in the long term with investment projects. So I think that the summary of what we're experiencing now is this precisely. But I would like to conclude by saying, if Brazil attempted to bite off more than it could chew, that 7.5% was clearly above our 2010 limit for the speed of growth without generating macroeconomic imbalances. But in 2012 and 2013 we are biting off less than we can chew, and I hope that we will see is the increasing of the cruise speed, which is 3 or 4% per year. I believe we are moving toward this, but that the numbers are being reviewed all the time, and last quarter it was very disappointing and needs to be improved. Aloysio, is there a lack of trash and complaints of indefinition? The government has the floor. Could the other microphone be better? Thank you, Oscar. William Vac is always chasing after the government. Look, I'm an old-fashioned journalist, and we are always making demands on government. Let me give an evaluation going beyond what was said by Giorgi and Giannetti. which I agree with, but we are experiencing the scenario post-crisis, which is very deep and began in September 2008 and has strongly affected the Eurozone, which represents the EU, which is 25% of global GDP. So how much is Germany going to grow this year? What is unemployment? 26% in Spain. 25% among young people. What's happened to Portugal? What's happened to Greece? A small drop of more than 7% in GDP, something we've never seen before. How are things in Asia? Japan has had a fall in GDP of 3.5%, and China is decelerating, and the growth has gone down, with the problem of a company where 40% of the economy is exports, which has no labor insurance or pensions. Each young person has to support 6 adults and has to have tremendous competitiveness, and is doing this in an increasingly aggressive manner because the stability of China demands fast rates of growth. In the United States, the central bank is spending $45,000 to manage the public assets per month, thus generating an exchange war and facing the fiscal cliff because they've gone beyond this. Half of the representatives are Republicans, with a president who is this. Look, in this scenario, Brazil is one of the countries that has most done this. In this scenario, our unemployment rate is certainly one of the best on the planet. And we made an option to not increase unemployment or reduce wages. We increasing this, which the company has said, the president recently said, the welfare of our population is one of the main benefits, and we can't grow outward in this way. So what were the options for the government? I think it was very well stated today, with very much courage to reduce the basic interest rates and bank spreads, and we adjusted the exchange rates aside from this, and we discussed this. We were talking about an exchange rate of 160, but we have an exchange rate of about 213, if I'm not mistaken. So we've adjusted the exchange rate. This has reduced the pressure of imports from this glut of products that we have throughout the world. Within the rules of the WTO, we have adjusted the exchange rates. We have reduced costs of capital, and public banks, BNDES, Caixa and Banco do Brasil, have their rates of investment, and they're doing very strong process of PPPs, infrastructure and logistics, which is a great systemic problem in Brazil, reducing energy costs because we have already amortized these generating plants, and the concession is possible without this. This is going to increase competitiveness in a sector in which Brazil is very strong with its renewable energy matrix. And with this set of measures and with the reducing of the tax burden, we see that it's taking place in significant portions of industry, have made it possible for our GDP exchange rate to reduce by 35% at a time when the other governments are raising their debt GDP ratios, and so investment in science, technology and innovation, many incentives of the BNDES are taking place, and that's why I conclude by saying we have an external scenario which is most certainly very difficult. We have to get along with this, and the Brazilian business people have postdoctorates in crisis, but we are facing this crisis in a much better year than better conditions we ever had, with 380 reserve, the public debt under control, reducing costs and maintaining our domestic market, which is going to be essential for our competitiveness. And we need increasingly to have PPP partnerships in order to move forward. And lastly, we're not going to have time to get into the questions. So you can't tell everything at all the time. We're going to look at these things one by one, but other people want the chance to speak. I'll speak later then. You can come back later. We know what microphones are like when the journalist gets hold of one. Aloysio, your view is very interesting. You bring a very important point to our discussion. You began by asking, what is the state of competitiveness of Brazilian industry and why do the investments? You don't even have to be a young economist to look at this. It's not possible to move forward. Jorge said that we are beasts of the market and the market says we must be cautious. Eduardo thinks that there is a problem of trust and of definition, and you draw our attention to a very negative international scenario in which, in your assessment, Brazil is very well in relative terms. Here I think it's time for our first block of questions that you will decide of this block of 3 questions, which is the one that you in the audience consider most important. So I will ask our technical people to put them up on the screen, because what was